Hi, I'm Angie with the Gamer Crafting Podcast, and this is why this small business needs the EU. Hi everyone, it's Angie here, and welcome back to the Gamer Crafting Podcast. I split this week's podcast into two separate podcasts because I felt like the material was so disparate, it would be weird for them to exist in the same podcast. So if you're looking for specifically the other podcast, which is about yarn and knitting, that is also up on the channel. So you might be wondering why the background for the podcast today is this lovely, beautiful landscape. So this is the fairy pools on the Isle of Skye up in Scotland. We went there 3 years ago with our friends Sue and Val. It wasn't a yarn or a knitting trip or retreat, but three of the four of us knit and crochet and are definitely yarnies, so Sarah was kind of the odd one out. This is one of my favorite places that I have ever been to, ever in my life. It's absolutely just stunningly beautiful. I had an amazing time. I can't wait until we're able to go back and visit there again. I had that as the screensaver today because I'm feeling a little bit threatened with my existence here in the UK. And I don't know, this is one of my favorite places that I've ever been, and it's here, so... First off, I wanted to address the Instagram posts that I've been making since Monday this week about a piece of legislation which threatens the rights of EU, EEA, Swiss, and Turkish nationals of owning a business or being self-employed or providing services in the UK. So, disclaimer, I'm obviously not a lawyer. I am a yarn dyer. I am many things. I'm not a lawyer. I'm especially not a British lawyer. My knowledge of these things is pretty limited. I do my best to research everything that I'm about to talk about, and I will drop links into the description below if you wish to follow up and check out any of the stuff that I'm referencing for your own needs. There was an article published on October the 18th, so last Friday, on the the Public Law Project website, which was warning of draft legislation for the Freedom of Establishment and Free Movement of Services Regulations 2019 document, which would allow ministers to remove rights of EU, EEA, Swiss and Turkish nationals to own or manage companies or provide services in the UK. So I didn't become aware of this until Monday night. I was just scrolling through Twitter, as you do on a Monday evening, and there's a few people I follow who work as translators in and around the UK and the EU. And this is kind of probably disproportionately affect the translator business community because almost all of them are self-employed. So I didn't become aware of it until Monday night, and I posted about it on Tuesday morning, I think. So it was signed by a committee of 9 to 11 government ministers. It was signed on Monday night, the 21st of October, using what's called Henry VIII powers, which is basically a way to create secondary legislation that doesn't have to be voted on in Parliament. Section 8 of the withdrawal agreement says that the government promised that they wouldn't use Henry VIII powers to enact policy change or sweeping legislation. This legislation does feel like it can be pretty sweeping with the way that it's worded and saying removing rights of people to be self-employed. I'm self-employed. Sarah's self-employed. She's a British citizen, though. It's not going to really affect her. I live here thanks to the EU. I use the surrender sing route. I have another podcast, which I'll link into the description, where I talk about that in the podcast where I talk about why I was in Italy last May. So I live here and have lived here for the last 5 years and some months, thanks to the surrender sing route, because the immigration laws for sponsoring a non-EU spouse are quite draconian, and coming off of 2 years in Canada, it was difficult, and we faced indefinite separation, which sucks when you're married. So we opted for the surrender sing route, and that's how I live here. My 5-year conditional visa was up this month, and I had to send off for a renewal. That's currently processing, so there's a lot of worry and stress in this house because it didn't go well the first time. In our experience, the government's not like super great at following their own policy and advice, so wording like this is very worrying, because that is just, it's quite wide in scope. So after they voted to pass on this in this committee, they admitted that they had done no impact assessments because, in their words, I'm paraphrasing here, but they said they didn't think it would have any real economic impact to not allow a huge swathe of people to continue running their businesses and being self-employed and paying their taxes. Okay. So here's why this particular piece of legislation matters. If you are an EU citizen and you want to go and live in another EU country, you have to do what they call exercising your treaty rights. And most of the ways that people do that is either working or going to school. Those are the two main ways that people exercise their treaty rights. There are other ways, but those are the two main ways. Most people who are an EU citizen living in a different EU country than that of their birth, that's how they're doing it. When you apply for your settled status or for your indefinite leave to remain, there's been a lot of weird, muddy stuff where that's concerned as well. You have to say that you've been exercising your treaty rights for 5 years. So if they're now saying that the main thing that you've been doing to exercise your treaty rights no longer counts as exercising your treaty rights, you're not going to get settled status. You're not going to get your indefinite leave to remain, which obviously is worrying for people who live here and pay taxes and have built a life here and perhaps have family here, friends here, built a business, built a life. It's troubling. It's worrying to have this kind of stuff creep up on you. So yesterday there was a little bit of clarification. Yesterday was Wednesday, the 23rd. So there was a little bit of clarification yesterday, and one of the people on the committee had said that it's only going to be applied to new arrivals to the UK. So not to people who've already been living here and working here, only to new arrivals, and only if there's a no-deal Brexit. If there's a deal in place, likely none of this will matter anyway. So this is in case of a no-deal Brexit, and they say that it would only be applied to new arrivals, but that's not actually anywhere in the document that it would only apply to new arrivals. There was also an amendment added in the House of Lords, which calls on the government to basically unilaterally protect EU citizens who are already living here and exercising treaty rights as per already allowed to exercise treaty rights. So that's kind of a little bit of clarification, which is, takes the pressure off like a tiny bit at least, that it's probably not going to apply to people who have already been here, but there's nothing in the document which specifies that. And the House of Lords is basically saying, well, we'll vote to say it's fine, but also you should maybe clarify in the document that you're going to protect everyone who's already here. So what's still worrying for a lot of people is that there hasn't been an impact study. They have not looked into how this is going to actually affect people at all. There's no real precedent for any of this because there's never been a no-deal Brexit before. So there's no real precedent as to say what is or isn't allowed in terms of using these secondary legislation powers to enact policy. They agreed that they wouldn't use it for policy change, but there was no written agreement saying that they wouldn't use it for policy change. So, who knows if that's going to change. Things seem to change every week as to what is or isn't allowed or what is or isn't going to happen. And we're all just, barely keeping our heads above water, trying to keep up with what's going to happen and trying to keep up with what's going to happen to our lives that we've built in a country that we moved to. It's expensive to move to other countries. I've done it 3 other times now. not 3 other times, 2 other times. Once when I moved to Canada on a 1-year work visa when I graduated school, and then when we moved to Ireland for our Surinder Singh thing, where we went and we made ourselves resident in Ireland. And who knows, like, life is just, you never know where life is going to take you. So this potential secondary legislation, it leaves quite a wide loophole that could be used later to deny rights to people, to EU citizens and EEA citizens and Swiss and Turkish nationals. It could be used later on because there's nothing in it right now that says that it can't be used to people who already stay here. And it could also potentially be used to inform the Home Office of new policy and guidelines when they are approving or rejecting applications for settled status, indefinitely to remain, etc., etc. My opinion is, even though they're saying it's not meant for people who are already here, they've also said it's for people who already have settled status. I don't have settled status. My application it's pending, and I don't know how that's going to turn out. Only 40% of applications for settled status are being approved right now because of weird loopholes, or people forget to include a piece of information or a document or what have you. So I'm not feeling good. I'm not feeling hopeful. I'm feeling worried and stressed and concerned that the business that I've worked so hard with my wife to build over the last 3 years it's gonna have to change a lot, or it's gonna have to move to a different country if we're not allowed to stay here. Well, she's allowed to stay here if I'm not allowed to stay here, but of course she would be coming with me because we're married. And so it's, on a personal level, the loss of productivity that immigration has caused in my life is pretty astounding. And that's both due to the time required to keep track of all these documents and to send all this paperwork in and fill out 63-page forms saying, yes, you approved me to stay here 5 years ago. I've just been living and doing the things that you said I was allowed to do, and I've not moved around much, and here's all the records of my taxes and residence and etc., etc. So between the time and the immense, soul-crushing amounts of worry that just sneak up on you in the middle of the night, yank you out of a deep sleep, and then you're just laying in bed with this, knot in your stomach, worrying about what the hell's gonna happen, the loss of productivity has been immense. It's almost November. I should have released the Christmas collection of yarns already. I mean, they're dyed, but I've been so busy trying to keep track of this, specifically this week, that they haven't been photographed yet. They're not ready yet because I haven't had time. And if you multiply that loss of productivity against everyone who is an EU citizen living in the UK who's worried, or who is self-employed and they're specifically worried about this secondary legislation, how much productivity has been lost nationwide? An immense amount. And for what? And for what? That's all I've got is, and for what? The other thing is that this kind of stuff that comes through on Twitter or other mediums where you find out about it's stressful, yes, but it doesn't make you feel like you're a valued member of society, of the community that you're a part of. Yes, people who know me on a personal basis are like, Angie, we love you. Of course we want you to stay. But on a whole systemic level, I don't feel super welcome. I don't feel like I'm wanted here, even though I've done my best to build a life in a country that I wasn't born in. That's all I'm guilty of, is trying to live with my wife in the country that she was born in. Because at the time that we moved here, living in the country that I was born in wasn't an option because of DOMA in the US said that, federal law prohibited any gay rights, basically, and under that is immigration. So I wasn't allowed to even consider living in the country I was born in. And to be honest, with the way things that are going in the US now, we wouldn't really feel safe returning there anyway. Side note, US immigration, just as difficult and challenging as it is here. They're pretty similar that way. For all of our governments talking about some sort of special relationship that the US and the UK have, it doesn't seem that way when you're going through immigration at all. So like I said, my renewal is currently processing, and there's a huge amount of worry. Every day when the mail comes, I get a knot in my stomach because I don't know if this is going to be the day that I get a rejection in the mail. I don't know if this is going to be the day that they say, hey, you're all good, no worries, just, check in a few more years. I don't know what's going to happen. Yes, we are privileged in that regardless of what happens, we will find a way. We have support networks, we are cisgendered, and we don't have health issues, we're not disabled. So, we're very privileged in that way. I'm going to be getting my Italian citizenship in the next probably 6 to 12 months based on ancestry, because my grandparents on my dad's side were from Italy. So, but I don't have it yet. That's not a safety net yet. That's all still processing. It takes these things, they all take a long time to sort out. So we have safety nets in that I'm going to be receiving an Italian citizenship. We have safety nets in that we have support networks and people that would likely help us in the event of some sort of catastrophic something or other. But there's a lot of people that don't have those safety nets. They don't have access to being able to get another EU passport for their partner to secure EU rights in the event of a no-deal Brexit. They don't have family and friends support networks. They don't have, a little bit of extra in the bank that would help them if they needed to move quickly. Side note. If we do have to make a quick move, it would likely drain everything that we've been putting away. So I'd really rather not have that happen. We've worked really hard to try and build up a business and try and build up a life for ourselves. And it's the anxiety of seeing it all ripped away and not knowing what's next. Sorry.